So with that, I wanted to introduce our speaker. Katie McDonald, as Mary just said, is our Vice President and Investment Strategist for the Chief Investment Office of Bank of America. Katie is responsible for the analysis of global economic and financial market trends, as well as her focus on international economics and the political economy. So I hope you'll join me in welcoming Katie McDonald.
Thank you, and thank you to the San Francisco Business Times for inviting me to speak here again today, and thank you to the mayors. So after a volatile year in terms of global trade, business investment, and weak manufacturing, the Bay Area, sorry, let me get my slides up. Don't want you seeing my face all the time. There we go. Okay, so the Bay Area economy continues to grow at some of the fastest rates in the country. So this slide shows the 20 largest metro statistical areas, and the San Francisco-Oakland metro area has the second fastest growth rate, growing by an annual average 7% in nominal terms. That is quite strong and even more remarkable when you consider that the 7% growth is coming off of such a large base. So
taking care of and making sure our community partners are always top of mind. So with that, I wanted to introduce our and we take that award very seriously, and we're always honored to be chosen. So again, our commitment to the Bay Area has never been stronger, and we're so happy to be your partner in the community to keep serving clients, making sure our employees are taken care of, and making sure our community partners are always top of mind. So with that, I wanted to introduce our speaker. Katie McDonald, as Mary just said, is our Vice President and Investment Strategist for the Chief Investment Office of Bank of America. Katie is responsible for the analysis of global economic and financial market trends, as well as her focus on international economics and the political economy. So I hope you'll join me in welcoming Katie McDonald.
Thank you, and thank you to the San Francisco Business Times for inviting me to speak here again today, and thank you to the mayors. So after a volatile year in terms of global trade, business investment, and weak manufacturing, the Bay Area, sorry, let me get my slides up. Don't want you seeing my face all the time. There we go. Okay, so the Bay Area economy continues to grow at some of the fastest rates in the country. So this slide shows the 20 largest metro statistical areas, and the San Francisco-Oakland metro area has the second fastest growth rate, growing by an annual average 7% in nominal terms. That is quite strong and even more remarkable when you consider that the 7% growth is coming off of such a large base. So combined, the 9 counties that make up the Bay Area contribute almost $1 trillion in economic output. California and the Bay Area are what we call high beta economies, meaning that they grow faster than the national average during expansions, but contract more during recessions. So this has raised some questions now that we are in the 11th year of our economic expansion. But in terms of the economic cycle, age is just a number. And despite this being the longest economic expansion in history, with yesterday showing that the GDP posted another quarter of growth, we believe that we are not at the end of the cycle. Growth has been much more sluggish than past cycles, as you can see from this slide, with the bottom red line showing the recent cycle. This is our recession indicator, and currently we think recession risks are low. We think that instead of being at the end of the economic expansion, we are at the beginning of a fourth mini upswing during this expansion. Importantly, low inflation expectations have helped the Fed become more accommodative and keep interest rates low, which should help extend the economic recovery. Also, despite the manufacturing slowdown, U.S. consumption in the services sector have held up. Strong U.S. consumption, as shown on the chart on the left, is enough to drive both the U.S. economy and the global economy, given the outsized importance of U.S. consumption and California consumption in the global economy. Also, household balance sheets are in the best shape in decades. So consumer debt as a percent of the GDP is at a cycle low, despite what you may read in the mainstream media. Also, household debt service payments, as shown on the chart on the right, are at historic lows. And so these strong consumer trends should help drive growth in 2020. That said, there are potential risks to this outlook. We are carefully watching the spread and severity of the coronavirus in China and in the globe, and also other uncertainties such as Middle East tensions, global trade wars, and a yield curve inversion. But as far as the manufacturing slowdown, we haven't seen it seep into the services sector yet, which is crucial because we think U.S. growth can continue as long as the services sector stays strong. In the Bay Area specifically, the majority of employees work in services, with professional and technical services being the largest employer, followed by healthcare. And in terms of GDP, over 80% of the total Bay Area economic output comes from services. These are industries such as real estate, healthcare, education, technical services, information services, and just 10% of output comes from manufacturing. That said, the Bay Area is not immune to global shocks, so I will cover that later in terms of the trade war's impact on the Bay Area. This slide here, I want to hit home on the fact that we are at full employment. We've never seen a tighter job market in 50 years. In the Bay Area, almost all of the counties are below the national average unemployment rate. And last year we saw solid growth. However, because of this tight jobs market, we think that employment growth should slow next year. And given this incredibly tight jobs market, one of the top concerns from business owners in the state is that they just can't find the workers. So in California, we have almost 800,000 job openings, which is more than the number of unemployed people who are looking for work in the state. Another issue of this labor force is the fact that the labor force participation rate has fallen since the crisis. Part of this is due to the aging of the population, but in terms of having the entire population of California participating in the strong jobs markets in the Bay Area growth, this remains an issue. The chart on the left is encouraging. It's encouraging to see the national participation rate starting to pick back up again as rising wages, a strong economy, and has incentivized discouraged workers to come back from the sidelines and re-enter the jobs market. But California's rate remains low, near historic lows. Another issue with this strong employment growth has been that there's been a lack of supply of housing to keep pace with the growing workforce in the area. The Bay Area home values are well above the national averages. I believe I showed this chart last year, and we're seeing a slight decline in the home values, but still well above the national averages. This continues to be a tough challenge for inequality, but also for businesses looking for work, as it's becoming increasingly hard to find low and middle income workers who can afford to live in the area. So now switching over to the financial forecast. In terms of this slide, it shows state and local finances. On the right-hand side, or on the left-hand side, we see that the top source of California state revenues in terms of tax collections come from personal income taxes. And this makes the economy much more economic, or it makes the state's finances much more economically sensitive. Also, what's incredible is that the top 1% of income earners in California account for almost half of the state's personal income tax collections. Yeah, that makes the state's finances incredibly vulnerable and volatile in a recession. It's also a risk that California is now seeing outward migration as residents are relocating in search of lower tax burdens or the lower cost of living. And the recent state and local tax deduction cap will only exacerbate this trend. So taking a step back at this near-term outlook and looking more over the long term, the key thing that we'll need to see in the economy in order to keep this economic expansion going is productivity growth. This has been very weak since the last financial crisis. Productivity growth rates have been very low, but we think a few forces could drive productivity in the years ahead to keep the expansion going. One of them being a tight labor market and stricter immigration policies, the second one being rising trade barriers. The logic being that a tight labor market could incentivize businesses to invest in productivity-enhancing equipment, whether it be new capital equipment, robotics, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and so on. But higher levels of productivity of policy uncertainty have hurt this business investment. As we've seen over the past year, businesses have stalled investments, so it's a key risk to the outlook. In terms of which state is driving productivity growth, it's no question this has been California, driven by the Bay Area. As you can see on the chart to the right, California continues to be the largest contributor to the national productivity growth rates in this country. I'm going to skip this next slide and just conclude that this is the outlook for the total exports. Now, to date, we have not seen signs that manufacturing has seeped into the services sector, but this could be a key risk in the years ahead. Despite this relatively healthy economic backdrop, there remains a high level of uncertainty in terms of trade tensions. Despite the Phase 1 China deal, there can be issues ahead, as well as the coronavirus impact on China. And what happens in China matters for the Bay Area. That's because when you drill down to the county exports, the largest importer of our goods is China. As well as in Alameda County, they are the largest exporter of goods in the Bay Area, sending $18 billion of goods overseas, which is about 15% of Alameda's GDP. So a lot of this county's jobs are related to the movement of goods, including warehousing, transportation, and so on. So another interesting stat is that of the companies that export from the San Francisco area, 91% of these were small and medium-sized exporters, which is a serious consideration for the local communities. And even for the service economies, more trade barriers and investment barriers can start to have an impact. While they may seem more insulated from the trade tensions, we might start to see the manufacturing weakness seep into the services sector. When you think of industries such as product design, marketing, financial services, extending loans, that's what I mean when I say manufacturing can seep into the services sector and spill over its weakness, which is a key dynamic to watch in the years ahead. Thank you.
Katie, thank you. That was truly, truly interesting and valuable information. We appreciate that. All right, so for our next forecaster, and after that we'll have our conversation with our mayors, we're delighted to have Ken Rosen, Chairman, Fisher Center for Real Estate and Urban Economics, Haas School of Business, UC Berkeley. So we'll hear what the future of real estate holds. Welcome, Ken Rosen.
Thank you, Mary. Well, as you know, I only have 10 or 12 minutes. Some of you have been to my talks, they're usually an hour and a half. So I'm going to do it fast. But following up on what Katie said, I think the most important thing we can talk about today is jobs. It is jobs that drive our economy. It's jobs that produce the income for everyone, including the progressives in San Francisco. We need jobs. And the idea that jobs are bad is just a mistake. So let me show you. This has been 10 years of job creation in San Francisco, so much greater than we had during the boom of the late 90s. That's the last boom that we've had. And this boom is so much greater, so much bigger. And this job creation generates demand for housing, but also retail sales and tax revenues to fund all the things we want to do. The East Bay also has had very strong jobs, and I commend both mayors for being here. Jobs, they're very good. They're both very good on the job front, knowing we need this happen. Again, the East Bay includes Oakland, of course, as the main job generator. And as Katie said, the unemployment rate is at record lows. Nationally, we're at 3.5%, the lowest in 50 years. And for the Bay Area, we're talking about in the twos. So labor shortage is really the issue here. And we have a labor shortage that we've not seen like this for 20 years. What's driving this economy? It's the innovation economy. The San Francisco Bay Area is the innovation economy. Whether it's Silicon Valley, San Francisco, or the East Bay, it's innovation. $500 billion, add those numbers up, $500 billion has been poured in the last 5 years into startups and late-stage venture. We're the center of this in the entire universe. And we have 60 to 70% of all this money stays here. The companies are here, and the money is here. And so that drives booms, and we, of course, as you saw from Katie's numbers, we have the biggest boom any place in the country. Not only do we have a startup culture, but we also have these huge companies, Google, Facebook, Apple, and Salesforce, and many others who have huge market shares. And that could be a problem for them, because we're talking about investigations today about privacy issues and antitrust issues. So these companies have dominated the market, and we do expect to see them, their growth slow. We've already seen that with Facebook, and we're going to see much more regulatory environment for these companies. We also have the unicorns. We're the unicorn capital. No one's ever seen one, but they're all here. And as you know, one of the biggest ones we had, Uber, went public. So remember, unicorns are private companies worth over $1 billion. Very few of them make any money whatsoever. And that's the problem. And Uber went public, losing $2 billion a year, went public. Its stock went down. It's sort of stabilized now. We saw that with Lyft as well. But the window has been closed. And the reason the window has been closed is WeWork. WeWork supposedly was worth $47 billion. It was a concept basically that didn't make sense. Locking up space long-term and leasing it short-term at high rates to non-credits. So they couldn't go public. Their valuation dropped dramatically. It was bailed out temporarily by SoftBank. And by the way, when I showed you the venture capital numbers, you have to add another $100 billion a year in for SoftBank, which has supported many of these companies that don't make sense. Wag.com, dog walking app worth $650 million. As you know, the startup robotic pizza company, it doesn't make sense. The head of SoftBank actually went to Berkeley, has a BS in economics in 1980, did not take my course. And if he had, he would have done some of these real estate startups in particular. So what has this driven in the real estate market? Well, we have the lowest vacancy rates in 20 years. South of the market, there really isn't much vacant space. And overall in the market, the vacancy rate's 5.8% at the end of 2019. Again, you may not remember it, but I was here then in the late 90s. We had even lower vacancy rates. So it's a very strong market. And it's quite different this time. There are a lot of big companies taking the space. It's not just the small startups. It's the big companies as well. And rents have now surpassed the peak 20 years ago. We did have rents of $80 a square foot 20 years ago. We then plunged to $30 during the dot-com bust, and we slowly built back up, and $86 a square foot again is the asking rent this is data from Cushman & Wakefield. In East Bay, we've also had a very strong economy. You saw the job numbers, and the vacancy rates come down substantially. And again, the difference is rent is, while it's doubled in the East Bay in Oakland, it's still much lower than San Francisco. So we're seeing a lot of companies look at the very big advantages: lower cost of housing, great transportation network, change in the environment, and I think it's here to stay this time. And thank you, Mayor Schaaf. Thank you, Governor Brown. Remember, Governor Brown started all this stuff. I had an hour conversation with him this week, and he really helped start this, but Mayor Schaaf has carried that on in a way that we're seeing lots of relocations. In terms of housing, that's the crisis we all talk about. And we've seen a lot of housing production. I know no one believes that, but these are the highest housing productions for rental housing that we've seen in a long time in San Francisco. And I would say this vacancy rates are basically non-existent. 4% is essentially a transactional vacancy rate. There's some vacant space as people move around, but this is basically close to the lowest vacancy rates we've ever seen. And rent growth has slowed in San Francisco. It was 3 or 4 years ago, 10% a year. It's only 2.5% a year. So I think Katie's chart showed that San Francisco has become somewhat more affordable. Totally unaffordable, we know that, but it's a little bit less unaffordable. The East Bay, Oakland has huge amounts of development going on in apartments. There's about 8,000 units going to be delivered over the next couple of years, and that has put some pressure upward on vacancy rates. There's some concessions being given as to lease that space. Remember, the new space is much more expensive than existing space, so there's some pressure there, but we see all this affordability issues everywhere, but as we get all this new space delivered, it's going to take a little while to sort out the marketplace. Rent growth has been higher in Oakland for quite some time, and you can see it's essentially almost doubled in the last decade and a half, but it's much more, or somewhat more, affordable than San Francisco. Finally, house prices, Katie's chart showed that we had this huge surge, and then in 2018 was our peak year. Last year, last couple of years, prices have slipped back both here and in Silicon Valley. The reason is we got to levels that were unsustainable. And so I think we expect flat to slightly up, slightly down. We do not expect another surge in house prices, at least in the next year, year and a half. East Bay has been a little bit stronger. Again, we start from a much lower level, been a little bit stronger, but essentially the same news is there. Each market, each submarket's different. Finally, Katie mentioned this, and this is a big issue. The Bay Area has a number of issues. I'm going to look at those risks in a second. We've had net outmigration of people who are already here. This is domestic. So you add the numbers of people coming in and the people moving out to Texas, Nevada, Portland, Salt Lake, and this is the first time we've had this massive outmigration. I think this is real. I know the governor, our present governor, doesn't want to talk about it, but it is a problem. We have international in-migration to California, which offsets that. So here's the net of international versus and domestic, but there's still net movement out of jobs and people. Now, let me just say that we are the center of the innovation economy, and that's what makes this so exciting. It's not just in consumers and .coms, it's also corporate America uses our research and development activities and our great companies that we have here. We're the innovative center not only in the world, not only in the U.S., but in the world. And corporate giants actually dominate this, even though we have this very active startup culture. But the strong demand has created housing shortages, and we know that. So here are the risks. And I gave you this percentages last year. We think that the likelihood of recession this year is about 25%. I think that's a little higher than Katie's B of A number. And then next year, 40%. But let me talk about the risks for the Bay Area. And the number one risk is the black swan event, the coronavirus. We don't know. Is this going to be a pandemic? It's been doubling every 7 days. China's trying its best to stop this. But if you look back at the history of the big pandemics, very hard to stop. What makes this so worrisome is unlike the 1918-1919 Spanish flu, which was the last big pandemic, we now, and that came over by boat, took a while. now we instantly can spread this by our air transport systems. We do have much better medical care, all these other things, but I'm quite worried that we don't know the outcome here. The stock market is somewhat worried about this. The bond market's very worried about it. And China is the second largest economy in the world. And the relationship to the Bay Area, as Katie talked about, is really vital. Both imports and exports were the center of that connection. And if they are in a sharp slowdown or even recession, and remember, a lot of the economy there is closed at the moment, I'm quite worried that that will reverberate back on us here. Of course, we know the housing issue. It's the crisis we all talk about. But we don't talk enough about the missing middle. We talk a lot about the low end and the homeless. We'll talk further about that. But the missing middle worries me a lot. We've got to raise our definition of affordability because prices are so expensive that even if you make $150,000 a year, it's hard to live here. So I think we really need to expand that definition. I think the quality of life things that we talk about are overlooked. We all know about the homeless, but is it really compassionate to leave people under freeways and off-ramps or on the street? I think it isn't at all. And I hate to say this, but we need to change. We need a right to shelter law of some type. We need, and they have it in many other places. We need mandatory mental health and substance abuse treatment. We can't leave people on the streets. It's just not right. And I have to give both mayors credit. They have a lot of political courage, but we need to go against some of the ideas that this is a free right of people to choose to do this. It's not good for the people who are on the street, and of course it isn't good for the quality of life for everyone else. The other issue is traffic. And again, we have very much of a anti-car culture. But traffic congestion has gotten, at least I've been here for 40 years, never seen anything quite like this. And I think it's a mistake to look at the car as an enemy. Yes, we'd like more public transit, we'd like more bicycles. I really don't think we should have any scooters, but that's another story. Without helmets, I mean, we're just asking for trouble. But we really need to work on this, and I know a lot of people are doing that. In terms of local policies, I think we have a very big difference between San Francisco and Oakland in terms of cost to get something done per unit, the fee structure. And Oakland's benefited from this, keeping the fee structure down. San Francisco was hurt by this, but California as a whole has this problem. Also, to think of office space as a bad thing, which is a lot of people's discussion, as you know, 25 years ago we passed Proposition M, which limits the amount of office construction. It hasn't been an issue until recently. Now we're against that limit, and there's an attempt to put something called Proposition E on the ballot, which discourages office space construction. It's a terrible mistake. We need to house the job workforce, we know that, but we need the jobs. Also, in San Francisco, we've gone backwards in terms of the Board of Supervisors. This tax on vacant rental space, that is a stupid idea. No one wants to keep their space vacant. That is something that no business wants to do that. No landlord wants to do that. There's an attempt to put a proposition to pass, supervisors to pass an ordinance of some type that would impose rent control on corporate housing. Again, a mistake. We want to make it easier for companies to move people here temporarily, and we're making it harder. And again, all these specific taxes we put on office to fund very specific programs, Prop C is one of them. Again, I think it's a mistake. We should come out of the general fund. Don't target the job producers. That just isn't the right thing to do. There are other risks out there, and Katie talked about this, but the state and local income tax deduction has been limited at the federal level to $10,000. This is a very big deal for California and New York and Illinois, and it's causing people to relocate and firms to relocate. And again, this was a targeted attempt by the Trump administration to make it more difficult for people to live in states that actually fund their programs. The large tech companies have been booming for a long time, but the regulatory environment's changing and their profitability might be impaired. We could very, very well see a large capital market correction, and that would mean a much slower growth rate. And as Katie pointed out, 1% of the population in California gives 46% of all the tax revenue. We need the 1%. Otherwise, we're going to have a big, big deficit. Lastly, interest rates at some point I've been saying this for as long as you've all known me, are going to normalize. And they're going to go up, and cap rates could go up. And then lastly, I don't even want to mention this, but we will have a major earthquake here, and that could well be a disruption factor. So again, thank you for having me, San Francisco Business Times, and I look forward to hearing from the mayors.
Thank you, Ken. Also very illuminating. So we appreciate you being with us again. And we're about ready to invite our mayors up and our moderator, managing editor, Jim Gardner. I did neglect to introduce two people that I want you to get to know, so I'll do that just super quick. And it's two new reporters on our team, so you got to stand up. Brian Rinker, who is Innovation, Startups, and Healthcare, and Laura Waxman, Real Estate. So take them to lunch, or they'll have to buy you lunch, but. All right, so we're delighted again to have our two great leaders of our two great cities here with us in conversation with Jim Gardner. So I'm going to actually have our sponsors are going to introduce each mayor. And so because we're in San Francisco, we'll introduce Mayor Schaaf first. So I'm going to invite Bill Acevedo, who is a partner in the corporate side at Wendell Rosen. So come on up, Bill, to welcome Mayor Schaaf.
Good morning. Thank you to the Business Times for giving us the opportunity to come up here and speak. My name is Bill Acevedo, and I'm a partner in Wendell Rosen's business practice group. Zach Wasserman's normally here, and many of you in Oakland would know Zach very well because he wears pretty much the same thing all the time. He has a wonderful hat that he likes to wear, and that's kind of his distinctive thing. So I'm very excited to speak on Zach's behalf. Unfortunately, he had an event today that he could not come. But that does not diminish our excitement for our mayor. Wendell Rosen has been in Oakland since 1909. You've probably heard that. And the firm has seen a lot of mayors over the time. We were very pleased and excited, to say the least, when Mayor Schaaf started helming our wonderful city. Under Mayor Schaaf's leadership, we've seen many wonderful changes in Oakland. Some of them are obvious, they're tangible, they're physical and real. From our office, we are seeing many cranes in the sky. There is a new energy on the streets, and there is an excitement in the business community, as well as our longstanding communities, people that have lived there and love Oakland for the wonderful city that it is. And I can tell you that I am most excited about Oakland because, like most people I meet in the Bay Area, I'm not from here. I'm from New Jersey. And New Jersey is an interesting place because it's also a place where it embodies some of the wonderful qualities that Oakland has. We have an excellent, beautiful climate, wonderful, diverse people. We have many industries that make stuff, and as you can see from the stats, we export a lot of stuff. In New Jersey, there's a sign that Trenton makes and the world takes. Well, I would say that that's also true of Oakland. Oakland makes and the world takes. So in that regard, I want to say that as excited as I am about Oakland, I can only tell you you're going to hear many wonderful things from Mayor Schaaf today. Chief amongst those, I want to congratulate you on the Chief Resilience Officer that you recently appointed, and I'm sure we're going to hear about that. So I won't steal your thunder. I want to thank you again for allowing us to speak, and thank you for the honor of introducing Mayor Schaaf.
Welcome, Mayor Schaaf. And to introduce Mayor Breed, Please welcome Dr. Maria Ansari, Physician-in-Chief and Chief of Staff for Kaiser Permanente San Francisco. And in 2007, Dr. Ansari became Chief of the Cardiology Department. So welcome, Dr. Ansari. And Jim Gardner, why don't you come on up, because after this you'll take it away. All right. Maria Ansari.
Thank you, Mary. Kaiser Permanente is a proud sponsor of this event and a proud partner with both our mayors. We began 75 years ago here in the Bay Area, and we have been part of the fabric of this community for 75 years. We look forward to another 75 years as we continue to innovate the way healthcare is delivered and support a healthy community. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce Mayor London Breed, the mayor of my hometown, San Francisco. Mayor London Breed is the 45th mayor of the city and county of San Francisco. She is the first African-American woman in the city's history to be mayor. She is a native San Franciscan, raised by her grandmother in public housing in the Western Addition neighborhood. Mayor Breed is committed to an equitable and just San Francisco and strengthening opportunities for all. Please welcome Mayor Breed.
To see you. Good to see you.
Well, Mayor Schaaf, Mayor Breed, welcome. Good morning.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Was just talking to a few people after I arrived this morning. I don't know if it seems this way to you, but it's hard to believe that we are still only ending the first month of 2020. It has been pretty much nonstop news whiplash since the start of the year, whether that's the coronavirus, as Dr. Fisher was warning us about, or the impeachment trial, which seems to be coming to a perhaps premature close on the national and world level. And here we've had news events from the Moms for Housing situation in Oakland, to the public corruption arrest this week in San Francisco, to all the things that have happened with SB 50. So I'd like to drill down a little deeper, and eager to, on some of these bigger local stories. So let's begin. Mayor Schaaf, as the visiting mayor this year, we'll pitch the first question to you. When you look at housing in Oakland, there's a lot of good news to report. You have completed more housing in 2019 than San Francisco for the second year running. The pipeline has gone from almost nothing a few years ago to 9,000 units now. What seems to be lagging behind, though, is affordable housing, even after an impact fee was added to address that specific issue. So what is the holdup, and how do you ramp up affordable housing in Oakland?
Yeah, actually, my latest numbers are we have about 9,300 units under construction right now and another 10,000 in the pipeline. So, I mean, we are doing our fair share of adding to the Bay Area's housing stock. But affordable housing still remains a challenge. I'm excited that this year we are going to announce that we are back on track to make the goal we set 4 years ago to create 4,700 new units of protected affordable housing. But I think that we're recognizing that we need to actually create more deeply affordable housing if we're really going to address our homelessness crisis. And Oakland has been creative. We've issued our own local bonds. We have invested in what I call a conversion strategy of actually purchasing existing, product, renovating it, and putting affordability protections on it instead of always just building building new, but nothing has replaced redevelopment. When redevelopment went away, that was the end to our biggest pipeline of affordable housing funding. And so I know Senator Bell has legislation once again to try and bring kind of redevelopment 2.0. We all admit that we committed a few sins with the first round of redevelopment, although it was kind of fun to see Jerry Brown, who had committed those sins, then take redevelopment away when he became the governor. But I think that we need to look at bringing that back because, you know, we're scrapping it together. Impact fees, density bonuses, you know, we're doing it all. Local bonds. I'm very excited about a Bay Area-wide bond or potential revenue measure that is made possible by AB 1487. Your Bay Area now will have an affordable housing financing authority, something that's been extremely successful in New York. That's exciting, but none of that really replaces redevelopment.
Okay. Mayor Breed, a lot of good news in San Francisco as well. More than 4,000 homes completed in 2019, which was the highest total, I think, in 3 years. 10,000 units in the pipeline for the first time in recent memory, if not ever. But it's important to remember that the figure that you tend to see for San Francisco is that we need 5,000 units a year just to keep growth, pace with job growth and population. So we're still not to that level yet of stopping the problem from getting worse, much less making it better. How do you make sure that the 4,000 units that were completed last year becomes a starting point for something greater in the future, rather than, as happened last time, we've had good years on housing, which turns out to be a blip?
Well, one of the things that I talked about when I was here before, that we hired a housing delivery director, Judson True, who's here with us today, and he's really hit the ground running. And the reason why we've been able to move forward with many of these development is better collaboration amongst departments, looking at where we are stalling with the production of housing, especially those housing developments where we can anticipate thousands of new units. We need to get those projects moving and figure out what are the delays, how do we move them forward, but more importantly, with everything that we have in the pipeline, with all of the challenges that continue to persist around development, you know, we need strategies that help us locally here address this issue. It's really tragic that SB 50 did not pass. And what I tell people, we all remember SB 827 that didn't pass before SB 50, which was a compromise. One of the things that I made clear to people, especially on the west side of town, I asked, you know, hey, how many of you grew up in this city? Tons of hands go up. How many of you raise your kids in this city? Tons of hands up. How many of your kids still live in this city? Hardly any hands go up. And if we're going to really address this issue, you know, we can't be afraid of density. And the fact is, we also can't be afraid to cut the bureaucratic process, because it shouldn't take 10 years to get 86 affordable units built that are within the existing codes. Not asking for height increases, not asking for any additional setbacks, and we still can't get 100% affordable housing done in a timely manner. And the fact is, politics, sadly, does play a role, because on the local level, you constantly, of course, you have, you know, constituencies, you know, who want what they want. And that's why I think it's so important that we look at a statewide solution to aggressively produce more housing. Because I can't even believe that Mayor Schaaf is able to do as much as she's able to do under the umbrella of a county where there's difficulty in even getting funding in the first place for affordable housing. And so we need what I believe are real changes on a statewide level, and that's where the business community can provide some support to helping us with the kinds of things we need to put forward, solutions that are going to help speed up housing production.
So let's look at the
Tony Atkins announced there will be a housing production bill passed this year. For a city like Oakland, we actually want to upzone a number of our neighborhoods, but it will take us 2 to 3 years to go through the CEQA process in what the state can do with the stroke of a hand. And so at the very least, they should do an opt-in process where those of us who actually want to have the benefits of an SB 50 can opt into it. I thought Scott Wiener made tremendous compromises, recognizing this tension between this desire for local control, which I think can sometimes be a dog whistle for something else, and a need to really meet our regional responsibilities. I'm really frustrated that SB 50 went down, but you know, Scott has just been so persistent, so, you know, just focused on that end goal. I don't doubt that he's going to try again. Maybe the 4th time will be a charm.
And I think that, you know, we need a lot more support from the business community because we know that, you know, for example, the business community assists with the development of housing. I mean, as we can see now with Proposition E and the challenges there, how are we going to keep up with the pace of office space and housing production if we can't get housing built fast enough? And that's why the State Controller's Office put out this report. We're talking about over the next 20 years a loss of $26 billion to our economy in San Francisco as a result of this. And that's what that means is we have to make significant changes, and we need support to make those changes. I mean, I had a counter ballot measure to Proposition E, and everyone was quiet. No one wanted to step out to support me on that ballot measure, which is why I dialed back, and I hope that this community would be brave enough to try and help to defeat Proposition E, because this will be bad for the business community. It will be bad for the city. And you know, it's not a us versus them. The business community consists of people who live and work in the city in the Bay Area. We need those jobs. Our economy is thriving because of it, because people want to be in San Francisco. And so I think part of it is trying to change the narrative and looking at creative ways and how we can work together on these issues. It doesn't always have to be an us versus them, and oftentimes you only hear certain groups of people at City Hall controlling the dialogue and creating the divisiveness, creating the tension. And sometimes when I'm out there as mayor and I'm fighting these battles, I'm like, where's my backup? Where's my cover? Where's my support? And that's where, you know, as mayors, we could use that sort of help. It's not about just supporting the business community. It's about protecting our cities and our economic stability. Detroit wishes they had an economy like San Francisco. There are so many cities that are suffering financially, and so we need to be able to maintain that.
So we hear whispers, rumors, rumblings that perhaps as soon as next week, you are preparing a local ordinance that could pick up some of the key parts of SB 50 and implement them in San Francisco.
You're hearing rumors?
We hear rumors. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I can tell you that during my inauguration speech when I was sworn in, I made it clear that I'm on a mission. I'm on a mission to get more housing built in San Francisco by any means necessary. And what that means is when I can't get charter amendments and other things passed through the Board of Supervisors, I'm going to need to take my case to the voters of San Francisco. And when I do that, I'm going to need the support of this community. So I'm prepared to put myself out there. I'm prepared to fight these battles and to campaign and to do whatever is necessary to try and move our city forward, to save not only years of production time for housing in general, but also to save money. That saves money and could potentially provide more units of affordable housing, in fact. And so I'm prepared to do that. We need to, within the next 10 years, at a minimum, build 50,000 new units, with at least 17,000 of those units being affordable. And so if we're going to be able to do that, I'm going to need to put forth bold solutions that require passage at the ballot box.
So does that include San Francisco-style sort of SB 50 light measure?
You will see soon enough.
Okay. Let's talk about homelessness. There's rising alarm among businesses, residents, pretty much everyone in this region about the trajectory of homelessness. And I want to say in both of your cities, this has been a key issue for you. I know Mayor Schaaf, along with businesses and donors, you've been building these cabin communities. I think you're up to 7 now. Mayor Breed, you've added 1,000 shelter beds in the last year, plus several new navigation centers, which is all beneficial. But if you look at the numbers, that homelessness is still increasing sharply in both of your cities, it's hard to argue that it's sufficient. So in addition to what you're already doing, what are the measures that you are prepared to roll out in the near future to tackle this problem?
Well, I'm going to start with that because I just have been living and breathing this issue really for the last year, and have been very honored to serve on Governor Gavin Newsom's Council of Regional Homeless Advisors. I am your Bay Area representative, so bring me your ideas. I will tell you that I think there is an idea that is far more effective than right to shelter. I am not a fan of right to shelter because our end goal should not be just moving the problem out of sight and keeping people in an undignified limbo that does not help them get back to self-sufficiency. Our goal should be preventing people from ever experiencing the trauma of homelessness, and to rapidly rehouse people, get them a living income, have them rehoused permanently. And so I, along with the co-chairs of the council, Mayor Steinberg in Sacramento and Supervisor Mark Ridley Thomas in Los Angeles, have proposed something called a legally enforceable mandate to end homelessness. Currently, there is no clarity at any level of government about who is responsible for what aspects of ending homelessness. No jurisdiction is required to have a plan and be held accountable to actually delivering results in actual homelessness reduction. Again, New York has a right to shelter. They have a huge homeless population. They're just indoors. They're just not on the streets. That is actually not solving the problem. It is hiding it. And so we want to be clear that it is government's job to not tolerate the humanitarian crisis and really offense of, in the wealthiest region, of the wealthiest state, of the wealthiest country, that somehow anyone could find it acceptable that people call the streets of our cities their homes.
I have a slightly different opinion about this because San Francisco, for example, over the past 2 years, we helped over 2,000 people exit homelessness. And we still, of course, saw our homeless population increase. And I think that one of the biggest challenges we have is we would like, of course, for everyone to be housed. We'd like, of course, for everyone to be self-sufficient and be able to take care of themselves. But, you know, we are sadly always going to have people with mental illness. We're going to always have people who have substance use disorder and have challenges there. We're going to always have people, unfortunately, who have issues around poverty. And the question is, you know, how do we provide at least a place for people to be in the process of trying to figure out what we need to do and how we continue to expand on those services. And from my perspective, you know, just, you know, trying to build upon those things, clearly we are doing so much to do that. And it's still not working. It's not working. It's not working. No matter, we could add, we're adding these 1,000 shelter beds. We're helping these people get housed. We're reconnecting people with their families. We're master leasing buildings from people to provide places for folks to live. We're paying people's rent. We have over 10,000 people that we are basically subsidizing as it relates to housing where we're not getting government subsidy. And as hard as we work, we still see the challenges on the streets. And so part of what I made clear after reaching the shelter bed goal that I had for 1,000 new shelter beds is we also have to just have places for people to go. And we have to be able to meet people where they are. And the reason why I supported safe injection sites is because, when you have an addiction, and some of you may have experienced this personally or with your families or what have you, people who are addicted to drugs, because you tell them they need treatment doesn't mean they're going to accept treatment. Because you tell them that you're going to even pay their rent for housing doesn't mean they're going to go to that place where they live every single night. And so this is why I'm pushing for meth sobering centers, safe injection sites, bringing people in, and people may say it's hiding the problem, but what we have on the sidewalks is not something that should continue to persist. So yes, I want to do pop-up places with tents and sobering centers and places to bring people indoors, because that's a start, right? It's not a solution. It's a start, and it will hopefully make a change so that when someone is ready to get the help and the support they need, we have to make sure that we make that connection. So I made a commitment that finishing this commitment to do 1,000 new shelter beds is not going to be enough. We need another 2,000 placements of various, options, whether it's a temporary, whether it's permanent or what have you, just to move people indoors for that next opportunity that could exist. But, it's going to also not just take us as mayors trying to deal with this challenge. I mean, we need state support. We need changes to conservatorship even more so than we have now. There are so many things that need to be done, and we need help from our state and federal government to do it. We're not going to be able to solve this issue and see a significant impact on our own.
And I agree with everything you've just said, and I also support safe injection sites, or we like to call them safe consumption sites.
They change the name every year.
It's a little more palatable. But I think it is really important that people in this audience know that the homeless are not just struggling with mental health and addiction problems, that the recent increase in homelessness that we are seeing is driven by purely economic issues. But yesterday launched an incredible new organization, all in Bay Area. I bet that clap over there came from Tamika Moss, the new director of the effort. Yes, it did. That was that table. Tamika is actually has worked for both the mayor's offices of San Francisco and Oakland. That's why she's so ready to take on this battle. But, a very important statistic that they really pushed yesterday, 41% of our homeless and most at risk of becoming homeless are employed. And so it is not just addiction and mental health we have to address. It is income inequality and housing shortage and housing affordability. All those things are driving this issue.
And I don't disagree. I don't disagree with Mayor Schaaf on that, but I also think that the problem with what we see around homelessness is the behavior and the challenges that exist with that population. And I think that's really what's becoming problematic, especially, sadly, the needles, the attacks, the drama that's associated with that, along with exactly what you're talking about.
And we know housing first is the most effective way to heal people, get a permanent roof over their head, and then we're able to address their mental health and addiction issues.
So you have companies like Kaiser Permanente,
Love you, Kaiser.
JP Morgan, others who are actually committing tens of millions of dollars in the Bay Area to affordable housing, to homelessness. How can other businesses that want to engage on this issue, what can they do to basically help address our homelessness crisis and augment what the cities themselves are doing?
I'll throw out two things. I mean, obviously donating dollars to some of the great service providers. You know, we opened our 7th cabin community this week in Oakland, and our Chamber of Commerce has been the main cheerleader. Thank you, Barb Leslie, has been the main cheerleader to get both companies and individuals. This particular cabin community, 100% of the startup costs paid for by 170 different donors. That is community coming together. But the other thing that I want to challenge everyone on, and Kaiser is doing a great job of this, you're starting to see some of the Silicon Valley businesses do this too. You know, Ken talked about the missing middle. And I believe that companies need to start financing protected missing middle housing, because you can get a return on your investment. But as government, I need to prioritize our most vulnerable. And that's not the missing middle. We can do that through zoning changes. But as far as pure dollars into construction, I need to prioritize the most vulnerable.
I think contributions are always helpful. We have a number of initiatives, including programs that support youth with housing and housing subsidies, and so donations are always welcomed that could help support not just a one-time contribution, but consistent contributions over the course of several years. The other thing is Prop C that passed around homelessness. If there is anyone whose company is impacted, they could waive, because the money is being collected, as we know, and allowing the city to use those dollars and waiving your right to those dollars pending this lawsuit that's happening, it could be helpful, because we would invest that money into homelessness right away. The other thing is assisting in ballot measures and other things that we put forward that have everything to do with housing. So, you know, that is really going to be important over the next couple of years, because we're going to need to make some significant investments. And it's really, for me, you know, talking about a $600 million affordable housing bond for seniors, for middle income, that is exciting. Everybody, of course, is like, yes, sign me up, I want to invest. But as soon as you talk about, well, I need this ballot measure for zoning, for changes, for this, for that, then people are a little bit more skeptical about that. And so those are the kinds of things that we need to do to reach the goals of getting people housed in the first place.
That's a great suggestion, and the mandate to end homelessness is going to need to be on the ballot this November, because it will require a constitutional change in California. And then also, I think one of the most impactful things that's going to be on the ballot in November for the Bay Area will be the first revenue measure for our regional affordable housing financing authority. Very important.
Mayor Breed, you said a little while ago that you felt the business community did not have your back on Prop M reform. I can tell you from talking to businesses, the feeling might be mutual. When you look at the new taxes, the new fees, the new permits, et cetera, that are falling on businesses in San Francisco, we've seen McKesson pick up and move to Texas. We've seen Schwab move their headquarters to Texas. We've seen a lot of smaller companies that don't make the headlines, but they're leaving quietly. We saw Blue Shield move across the bay to Oakland. What can you can take your victory lap here in a sec, but
I don't mind sharing either, by the way.
What can San Francisco do to be a more welcoming place where businesses want to remain there?
Help me elect good members to the Board of Supervisors. How about that? So that I don't have to raise all this money to fight all these battles.
Yeah.
But I will say that it's quite frustrating. And I'm really excited about some of the things that we're going to try to do, not only for small businesses. You know, we don't have necessarily the support to get rid of certain fees at the Board of Supervisors, but we do have, hopefully, the resources. We're trying to invest into reimbursement and other improvements and support for small businesses to help ease the financial burden on them. We're looking at reform to the gross receipts tax and how that might work so it's more fair and more equitable, and we're bringing the business community in to help in that conversation. There were some people that wanted to put taxes and just blanket taxes for IPO, CEO, and that's just not responsible without bringing the community together to have the discussion and talk about the impacts. So I think it's really, it is really challenging when sadly you have, and I will say there are a number of members of the Board of Supervisors that have worked really, collaboratively, responsibly, and big picture and helping to lead these discussions so that we can collaborate better. But, you all see the same stuff I see, and it is a real challenge when you have people who are obstructionists and are trying to make a name for themselves, which compromises, what we actually need to do to work together in order to, make sure that we're not losing businesses. Because when we lose a business, we're not just losing a CEO. A CEO is going to be fine no matter what. We're losing the people who are the HR folks and the receptionists and the janitors and the accountants and people who are, basically that missing middle, folks who probably can't even afford to live in San Francisco unless they're probably living at home in their mom or pop's ADU. I mean, it is just ridiculous that we're not thinking about the impacts. And I'm always, of course, thinking about the impacts because, not just because I'm mayor, but because as a native of this city and as someone who's been so fortunate enough to get so many incredible opportunities, especially serving in this capacity, I should not be the only one. And I don't want us to continue to go down that path. And so I'll continue to do what I can around changes to our policies.
The last time I counted, and I did go and count, I am indeed that kind of nerd, there were 150 or more different permits in San Francisco that might apply to businesses as a whole or particular types of businesses. Probably with the Office of Emerging Technology, there's probably more permits since the last time I looked. I know you've been focused on trying to cut the red tape, but so were your predecessors, and the red tape still remains. So why is the bureaucratic beast in San Francisco seemingly so impossible to tame?
Well, your guess is as good as mine. But I will say that one of the things I'm really excited about is the new building that's going to be opening, the permitting center, where planning, Department of Public Works, DBI, all of those departments where you have to go across the street, you go down the street, you get we're bringing those departments together, and we're bringing those departments together in a way where it will be easier. We're trying to streamline the permitting process so that we make it easier for people to do, simple over-the-counter stuff that shouldn't take weeks or months, so that you don't need people might get mad about this, the permit expediters, but you shouldn't need a permit expediter to get permits. And then we're going to be hiring a new planning director soon, and the goal is to try and look at ways to, a lot of this is proposing policies, and the question is, are we going to be able to get these policies through our legislative process? And in many cases we won't. And what are we going to take to the ballot because it's necessary in order to speed up production? You know what we were able to do with ADUs. It went from an 18-month process to a 6-month or less process. And that was just an executive order for me. So whenever I can do that, I'm going to do it. But sadly, in some cases, these are kind of legislative things. And again, it goes back to making sure that we are paying attention to what's happening at the Board of Supervisors and who we elect to represent us, because there's a lot of power there and it's not always used for the right things.
Yeah, and if I can blame the media a little bit.
Go for it.
You guys always write the story when a legislator introduces something or comes up with an idea. You never actually look at whether that idea in fact did good. Like how has it actually manifested itself in real life, particularly on top of the totality of everything that already exists. So just, for those of us who live with the consequences of, people kind of chasing headlines, you guys could help us.
That's such a great point,
That's true.
Mayor. You can write a story about how successful ADUs are since my executive directive. That's a perfect story.
Next year, we'll have an event where you ask the questions and I answer.
I like that.
Okay, Mayor Schaaf, I said we'd let you take a victory lap here. So to some extent, San Francisco's pain in terms of businesses leaving has been Oakland's gain. You've had Blue Shield, you've had maybe two dozen others, I think, that we've counted. There's a huge investment boom going on in commercial real estate in Oakland, largely based on the premise that this trickle is going to at some point become a flood. Some of this development that's going on in Oakland is of a scale and a scope that really hasn't been seen before, and some of it is taking place without any idea who those actual tenants are going to be. So is there a danger that Oakland is going to kind of get out over its skis here and overbuild, or is this just something that's been a long time coming?
Long time coming. I think we are great skiers. Nice skiers, good. Black diamond all the way. It's been a long time coming. Oakland is a phenomenal city. Great transit, transportation hub, beautiful weather. We don't get your fog in the summer.
I love the fog. Wear my winter coat.
You know, I did not anticipate quite the explosion that we've had. When I was running for mayor, 6 years ago, people said, "What's your economic development strategy?" And I said, improve the public spaces and pave the damn roads and lower crime. And people said, that doesn't sound like an economic development strategy. I said, in Oakland, it is. Because if we fix those things, the city speaks for itself. The city sells itself. It was very gratifying. I think it was at one of these events that I got to prove someone wrong who said, no one will ever build an office tower in Oakland on spec. Ha ha.
Well, the other thing that happened at this event last year is when we were sitting here last year, it seemed like for the first time ever, the fate of all of Oakland's sports teams was settled. The Raiders were going to move to Las Vegas. Raiders have moved to Las Vegas. Warriors were going to move across the bay into Chase Arena. They've done that.
Yeah, and I think there's a little curse that came with, no, I'm just
And they...
You know what? You're right. There was a curse when the Niners went to Santa Clara, and now they've broken that curse.
No, I love my Warriors.
Okay, we're not going to tempt the basketball gods anymore here, but the third part of that was the A's were going to stay in Oakland and build a ballpark. Yeah. So since then, there's been a lot of confusion on that point in terms of how much help they will get from the city to get to the finish line, and even between your office, the city council, and the city attorney, who's going to be in charge of how Oakland works with the A's. So is this confusion that you can clear up?
Listen, developing on the waterfront in the Bay Area is going to be complicated. But from my point of view, everything is going well. We're going to see the draft EIR probably within a month, and we should have the project in front of the city for approvals within the year. And of course, it's complicated. Oakland is full of passionate advocacy. And we have an independent elected city attorney, and that has played some role. But I really do feel like we are all on the same page. It's another thing that people said, that will never happen. You will never get a waterfront ballpark built in Oakland. But I look forward to proving those skeptics wrong as well, because it is going to be fabulous. Mm-hmm.
Mayor Breed, the FBI report that came out this week on the Department of Public Works makes pretty lurid reading. be clear, let's keep our allegedlys in front of this and give someone the presumption of innocence because they have not been convicted of anything yet. But if even a small part of what the FBI report, and I have been through all 75 pages again, I am that nerd, it is clear that long predating your term of office, there was a nest of corruption that was building up within a key city department. How do you make sure, and are you taking steps to make sure there are not other nests of corruption that have taken root within City Hall?
Well, the first thing that I did when I was notified is to reach out to our city attorney and our controller's office to ask for an independent investigation, to look at contracts, to look into certain departments, and to really explore whether or not there could be challenges that exist. And of course, we are fully cooperating with the FBI. It's really unfortunate, as you know, and the fact is we need to look at what might have happened and where we went wrong in order to make the appropriate correction to address this so that this doesn't happen happen again. It sadly has happened in the past over the years, and unfortunately still has not taught people lessons of what to do and what not to do. I think the city does a really great job in communicating its messaging around, things that people should or should not do, and we need to continue to do that. We need to make sure that the appropriate checks and balances are put into place, and also just remember that there are a lot of people who work for the Department of Public Works who are, it's a really challenging time for them right now. They are the people who are helping to build our city and keep our streets clean, and I went to visit them yesterday in the morning, and just a lot of sadness and frustration around what's happening and feeling targeted. And the fact is, I wanted to assure them that they are doing a great job. We appreciate the fact that they showed up at 6 in the morning to go and continue to do their work, and that we stand behind them. And when things like this happen, unfortunately, it impacts so many more people in such a hurtful way. And what we want to do is hopefully make sure that we're doing a better job of providing the safeguards to assure that it doesn't happen again. And that's really the best that we can do. We have in San Francisco, a lot of, approval processes, clear guidelines, direction, independently elected city attorney, like all of these different things, but there might be more that we can do to avoid this in the future.
In addition to the housing bond that you were talking about earlier, Mayor Schaaf, the Bay Area seems to be on the brink of finally thinking big and thinking regionally about transportation. There is going to be appearing on the ballot of all 9 counties, I think it's in November, $100 billion for transportation to really fundamentally change the way we get around this area.
That is not a done deal. They do not have legislative authority to place a measure on the ballot yet. And let me be very clear, I do not support a transportation-only measure on the November 2020 ballot for the Bay Area. No one is dying from sitting in traffic. People are dying from not having housing. And so the polling has showed that people are starting to get a little thin about all of our tax asks. And so I think we need to be very strategic and have our priorities in line. Now, I am very encouraged because recent polling just came out that showed that a single sales tax measure to fund both housing and transportation could pass on the 9 Bay Area ballot. And that inspires me because I think we need to continue to drive the message that housing and transportation are inextricably linked. And so that is the thing that I'm going to be pushing for and supporting. But I am not going to sacrifice housing for transportation.
So you would push back on a transportation-only measure?
Yes, Jim is. I know I love you, Jim,
but
we're very clear about this. We spent our day together. In fact, I'm missing the MTC retreat right now to be here with you. I am a regionalist, but I think we actually benefit when we see these issues as integrated and invite the Bay Area to be all in on the 2 biggest challenges that we have right now.
So what form would this housing bond take? Would it be a sales tax measure or something other?
So what was pulled recently was a single sales tax, a 1-cent sales tax increase that would then be split between transportation projects and housing needs. The thing that I like about a sales tax better than a bond is you have more flexibility in how you can spend it, including shallow rent subsidies, which is something I think a lot of us are discovering is needed to combat homelessness. But the devil is in the details. There are 2 different campaigns. There is MTC and ABAG, which are the authorities that must place it on the ballot, and there's the legislature. They have to, by a 2/3 vote, approve putting the transportation measure on the ballot or a combined measure on a sales tax.
Why does the legislature right now strike me as the place that things go to die? But
Well, last year, AB 1487 passed, and that authorized the Bay Area, 9 counties, 101 cities, to, for the first time, have an affordable housing financing authority, and authorized the 9-county Bay Area to have a housing measure on the November 2020 ballot. Again, the transportation advocates are trying to get that same act, although they will need a 2/3 because it will be an urgency action. So stay tuned. It's always exciting up in Sacramento.
okay. So I believe you probably both will have noticed we have an election coming up this year.
Really?
You were both Kamala Harris supporters, I believe, while she was in the race. Since she pulled out, Mayor Breed, you have, I think it's fair to say, surprised many people in your city by endorsing Mike Bloomberg.
Yes.
So not to go through Mr. Bloomberg's entire agenda, but briefly, what prompted you to go in that direction?
Well, first of all, I'll start with our conversation around stop and frisk and him making it clear, well, I won't make that mistake again. The fact is, I appreciate when I first came into office, Michael Bloomberg reached out to me, provided a lot of support around homelessness, and worked with my team over the years since I've been in office to help invest in support around collaboration and being able to better address this issue. He's done that not just for me, but for other mayors throughout this country. And what I appreciate about what he's done, not only as mayor, but what he continues to do is really he understands that cities are at the heart of where change happens and where we need to focus our resources and our attention because we want to make sure that our cities are successful. And the way that they're successful is with resources, is with support, is with understanding the complex issues and being able to strengthen the people who are actually doing the work to run these cities. And I really appreciate his vision for wanting to see successful cities in this country and what he has done to take on issues that aren't necessarily popular for New Yorkers, like messing around with their cigarettes, supporting the sugar tax even here in San Francisco, some of the issues that impact health, his action around climate, his understanding of business. I mean, I just think that, the challenge that we face, and to be clear, he's not the most charismatic and fun person to listen to. Usually we want our politicians to have this great personality, but his proven track record of what he's done for New York, his ability to work with people and bring people together, his understanding of business, and his willingness to take on unpopular issues that have an impact on people's lives is what drew me to him. And I do believe that, he has the ability, if selected as the nominee, to really take on Trump like like no other. And I mean, when you think about it and who we decide to be the nominee, who's going to go on stage and actually appeal to those undecided voters, who's going to be able to go toe-to-toe with him around those issues and not turn anyone off because they are so extreme with their issues and they may not be necessarily realistic. So I'm concerned about what might happen and the challenges with our party. And I thought, from my perspective, look at all the mayors, and especially many of the African American mayors, who have coming out to support him, because he's also, and I'll also say this that I appreciate, he is talking specifically about an African American agenda, not necessarily just lumping African Americans into a minority agenda. It's a specific African American agenda because the challenges historically that has existed with the African American community. And I'll just say this, even in San Francisco, you know, it's great, you know, African American first African woman mayor, but less than the 6% population, and African Americans still disproportionately represent higher numbers of homelessness, higher numbers of folks involved in the criminal justice system. I mean, it's clear that there needs to be a better focus on that particular issue, which is why he, of course, acknowledges, you know, the mistake of stop and frisk, and it's clear he will never make that mistake again, and he will have people like me and others to hold him accountable to that. But I also truly appreciate his rollout of his plan to really address these challenging issues.
Okay. Not to change the subject, but I'm going to change the subject. Something I wanted to make sure we dealt with during our time this morning is coronavirus. It seems a matter
What?
Coronavirus. It seems a matter of when rather than if that it will arrive in the Bay Area, given the links that exist here, trade, population, et cetera, with China. Are your cities ready? Are you taking measures to be ready?
You know, Mayor Breed is going to answer that a lot better than I am, because she is both a city and a county, which also makes me jealous because you have such a better ability to respond to homelessness. You know, Oakland is one of 14 cities in Alameda County, and so we've been taking our direction from the county's director of public health. I know I reached out yesterday to our director of human services to even start messaging to our own employees who are understandably scared how they can be ready and protected. But I will defer to, you know, the health experts that oversee how we actually respond to an epidemic.
Yeah, and we had a press conference this week to just really update the public about where we are, and there have been a lot of confusion around flights coming into San Francisco, which we consistently diffuse. We let people know as soon as we know what's actually happening. There is a system in place if someone comes from that part of the country here, either on a flight or any other means, to you know, quarantine people and to go through a number of tests if necessary, with our Department of Public Health, with our airport and others. We continue to be on high alert and paying very close attention to this issue, and reaching out to various communities around the symptoms, and people who have been in touch with people who've come from that particular part of China where we know there are challenges. And so we remain focused on communicating as much as we can when the information becomes available, but we are prepared to deal with it.
This seems like homelessness, like housing, like transportation, something that could be more effectively tackled regionally than as a collection of cities and counties. Are there any regional moves afoot to deal with potential coronavirus that you know of?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're in touch, of course, with, you know, the governor's office and making sure that we're communicating what is happening in San Francisco. And our goal is to, you know, take their lead on any other kind of statewide plans. We've not necessarily heard of the details or anything that they're doing, and so I'd let them share that. But here in San Francisco, we are focused on San Francisco and what's within our jurisdiction to control.
Okay, okay. Mayor Schaaf, I didn't want to run out of time here without at least acknowledging what has happened with the Moms for Housing situation. It struck me as something that could have been handled better from the start. It was handled in the end. Are there moves afoot in Oakland to prevent further situations like that? I think there's legislation that's going forward from someone that would deal with that.
Well, we've actually been working, a tenant's right to purchase is legislation that other cities have adopted. In fact, San Francisco has had it, I think, for a while, as well as a community opportunity to purchase. And this idea of, give us the opportunity at fair market rent to take housing in particular off of the speculative market and either put it into the ownership of the tenants who've been living in that building or to a local nonprofit affordable housing developer or community land trust. Again, we know that we don't have the time or the money to build sufficient affordable housing. And so these are other tools to try and take existing housing stock and actually put it into our protected affordable housing stock.
Okay. I see from our timer we're starting to run down the clock here. So I wanted to ask both of you to look forward into the rest of 2020. And if you're sitting here next year at this time, what's the one thing you will want to say that you accomplished in 2020 that was most meaningful? And whoever wants to take that one on.
I reduced homelessness. That people are not suffering on the streets of my city, that people are not suffering on the streets of the Bay Area, that people are not suffering on the streets of California, which currently has half of the nation's unsheltered residents just in our state. I would like to say that I did something to stop that suffering.
I would like to be here, of course, next year with, exceeding my goal of 5,000 new units built in San Francisco. And also, I want to sit here next year excited that people are noticing a difference and see a change. And the numbers are one thing in terms of a drop in homelessness, but people are seeing and feeling it. They're noticing a difference. I want to be able to come here next year and say that.
So homelessness for both of you, that is priority number one.
Of course.
Yeah. It should be everyone's number one priority.
Okay. Well, I want to thank both of you. It's been informative. And
you didn't ask me one of the most important questions.
No, we got a few minutes. What is it?
Who do I think's going to win the Super Bowl?
Is there a question who's going to win the Super Bowl? Go Niners?
Of course, go Niners.
Do you have a bet going with?
So yeah, I have a bet going on with the mayor of Kansas City. So of course I said I wanted barbecue ribs because I'm going to win. So I said send me some ribs. So that's the bet, some ribs and some beer and some other things. And so my bet is, many of you know Thang Long in the Richmond Sunset area. It's like garlic noodles and crab. Roast crab is like one of the best anywhere, and we're known for crab, so my bet is that, and Deanda's Bakery, a rum cake from Deanda's, because rum cake is my thing too. So I bet like my favorite stuff. And of course I threw in some beer because it's football from Anchor, and so those three things are my bet, and his is like ribs and some other things, but he's not going to get our food unless he pays for it because we're going to win. And I'm going to share my ribs with all of you.
Either of you going to the game?
No. I'm going to the game.
You're going to the game?
Yes, excited.
Okay, I want to thank both of our mayors. It's been a good morning, and we look forward and wish you the best of luck for the coming year.
Thank you. Great. Thank you.
And I'll add my thanks. Really, it was so enjoyable. I had a great time out there listening to both of you and learned a lot. And Jim, great job moderating. And so thanks again for sharing your morning with us and your insights. And we wish you great success in achieving your goals this year and in the future. So thank you for being our great leaders.
Thank you.